starting our journey to make a concrete planter mold. The idea is we're going to make a mold that looks just like an antique planter box, or actually an apple crate box. This is a facility that actually reclaims old lumber. They take down old barns, salvage the wood, and repurpose it. What we're after is old growth pine wide plank, which is very rare. You can see we found some wood that's 20 inches or more wide. We might also make a dining table mold out of these two. How much did we end up paying for all this lumber, Bill?
It was $700 for all 6 pieces.
$700 for 6 pieces. It seems like a lot, but they'll live forever in concrete now. Here's what we're going to try to accomplish today. We're going to build a simple box. It'll be a planter out of antique wood. We start by doing this. Now, to make this liner out of rubber, we'll do a section view that'll look like this. Our rubber will come over the top. This will have wood grain down the sides like that. To make this side hold, we're going to incorporate a piece of plywood to back the rubber. So our rubber is going to come like that. Our plywood is going to be inset into the rubber, like so. And our rubber is going to come down like this. This will be our plywood backer. The reason is we want this to have wood grain, this to have wood grain, and we want this form to seal at the bottom and hold against the wall, or else it could flop against the concrete and not hold steady. So that will be the section view. Now, to prep our wood, decide which side we want the rubber to hit. And then it's just a quick clean with a wire brush. Now, if you want to, you can buy some cut nails to add some authenticity. Now, if your wood doesn't come with enough saw blade marks in, you can actually add your own using a saw. Bend it like this.
Made this box that's slightly undersized so that when we put our antique wood on the outside, it all lines up. So I'm putting the first piece on and I'm leaving a 3/4 inch on each end, and that's where the side pieces will come in and fall flush to the ends here. Using an air nailer with some small staples in it so that they virtually disappear.
Shipping 1200, shipping 1200.
So to prevent any rubber from leaking between the boards as we build this planter, we're going to take some clay and seal up behind the board so that as we place the next one here, if rubber does seep between the boards, it can't go anywhere. It can't go behind the board and lock on. we always warm the clay up a little bit just so it's very squishable when it goes in there. So now you can see we've sealed that edge there. So now if rubber does seep in between the two boards, it can't go anywhere behind them. Now we want to make simulated metal on the corners of the boxes. And Mark found this, it's like a expanded polyurethane vinyl piece. One side has a texture that kind of looks like leather, but the other side actually has a very, like a stipple texture that could look like metal. So that's the side that we're actually going to use. We're going to cut strips that are about 3 inches wide and bend them around each corner.
Now in order for us to get our faked galvanized corners stuck before I nail them, I'm going to line them up, and I'm going to use my hot melt glue gun to glue this vinyl flooring into place. One side. Here is a tool that you could use for claying your forms you're going to pour rubber in, but it also works very well for your concrete forms. It's called a walnut hollow clay extruder. It comes from Michael's, the craft store. First thing you do is you drill out the handle. Drill the rivet out so you can pop the handle off. Then you're going to use your drill to run it. Fill it with clay. Put the cap on. And extrude. Simple.
So now we have some little bits of cracks between boards, and to prevent the rubber from running back in there and then trapping, I'm going to go through with clay and push clay into there, and then with a very sharp pointed device just kind of going to recarve the slit so that it looks like there's still a crack there. Visually it's still there, but in actuality it only goes back a little bit, just enough to give the definition. So we have a little bit of a crack right here, and I just take a very fine bead of clay, push it up in there, and just take what looks like a pencil, and just kind of roll it and turn it as I do that, and it pushes the clay right into the seam, seals it up, but visually the crack is still there.
We want to distress it. I want to get this thing charred down to charcoal in an area like this. The next model will look like a planter that's been through a fire. This is a Harbor Freight propane torch. It's my only worry. We'll see what happens. this cool, go to lunch and set it up and pour it. Could look pretty cool.
Okay, to kind of recap where we are now, we've built an inner box. We attached our reclaimed lumber to the outside of the box to make it look like a large planter box. Took some, what looks like, I guess it's a vinyl product. In the end, this will look like metal. It has the right texture and everything to be metal. Also roughed it up a little bit. We plan to make that like rusty areas in the finished product. Got some of these funky nails that look like they're old school. They're in there for some effect. Went through and played up all the seam lines. Played up the seam line around the top. Wire brushed the whole thing. Glue it all down real good. And now we're ready to seal it so that we can start to work on pouring rubber against it. So to seal the wood, we're going to use a product, it's Polycoat. It's both a sealer and a release. And it'll put a light silicone barrier on top of that wood so that the rubber doesn't stick to it. So we'll apply a liberal coat of Polycoat. You'll notice it'll get soaked up by the wood. When this is all done, it'll look like there's nothing on it at all. But in fact, there will be a very thin silicone barrier on the outside of the wood.
Just slap it on there, huh?
Yeah.
It has to be flammable, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
How many coats?
I'll probably give it 2 just because it's a very porous, dry, old wood. Now we're building the mold box, and we've got these features that will allow the rubber to lock onto the side of the mold box so that when you're casting the part, the rubber doesn't fall away from the inside of the box. Made up this little fixture here to show me how to position it. So I've made up this little fixture here that's the right height and width, and now if I screw this on here in this position, when I take this away, I end up with a little wraparound feature that we're going to have on the top side of the mold to hold it to the inside of the mold box. now we've located the box on the bottom board, and we're going to just pull it off the table ledge enough so we can screw it down to the board from below.
How many screws?
Now we've screwed the box to the bottom board, and we have just a little gap here that we're going to go ahead and fill with clay. Again, just so no rubber runs underneath and make the edge of that rubber mold a little raggedy. We want it to be a nice square corner though. That's good. That's good. So now we've taken the mold box off the master, flipped it upside down, put it on the floor, because we want to install bolts and T-nuts to hold the box securely to the bottom board. We're doing that because if you run screws in and out constantly to make molds, those holes will eventually strip out and no longer hold for you. So instead of doing that, we'll drill through holes, put T-nuts on the bottom board, and then you can actually bolt and unbolt hundreds of times with no failures. So I flipped it over because I have to drill through the center of this rib that sticks up. If I drill from the other side, I'm kind of drilling blind and I may not be on the center of this. By flipping it over, I can drill right from this side and make sure I go right through the center of that. And now when we put this back on the bottom board, I'll drill from the other side and continue that hole through the bottom board. Okay, now we put the mold box back on the bottom board, and we've clamped it in position, spacing it roughly 1 inch all around, so we'll end up with about 1 inch thick of rubber all around the box. Now I'm going to locate these holes in the bottom board by drilling through the holes that we just put in when it was upside down. Then we're going to take a through bolt, a washer, and put a T-nut on the bottom side. I guess I need to get a wrench to do the rest of this. So now we're going to put the framing on the top that stops the rubber from running across the entire top of the box. We're going to frame this out so we can form that lip that just captures the top detail of the planter box. We're going to use screws with some large flat washers on them. The flat washers prevent this plywood from splitting. Okay, now we've finished up the master, caulked in all the seams and joints with clay, and we've done the same to the mold box. And now we're going to seal it one more time with polycoat. After we seal it with polycoat for the last time, we're going to let it sit overnight because the polycoat has to be thoroughly dry before you pour the rubber against it, or it may inhibit the rubber and it won't cure. So we'll give one last coat of polycoat, let it sit overnight, and then come in tomorrow and pour the rubber. Okay, when you apply the polycoat, you want to kind of start at the top, and it's a clear water-like material, so you can see everywhere that you put it. You don't want it to puddle anywhere, but you want to make sure you get good coverage everywhere.
Does it have to get all the way into like the little?
Yeah, you want to be able to see it, like, so that you know it's there, kind of thing.
Yeah, but I mean like in the cracks and whatever.
Yeah, it'll go in there, I think. Because it kind of sucks it right in, right?
Okay. Well, some spots it seems like not so much. What? Maybe I'm not putting enough on.
Okay. Now we're going to take the clay and just kind of put it on the edge of this. This will end up being the seal between the mold box and the bottom board. And I'm just kind of squishing it on there a little bit so that it doesn't fall off when we flip this over and put it onto the bottom board. So we've polycoated everything, but to add just a little bit more release to it so that it doesn't want to bite into any of this detail, we're going to spray the surface with 2300. This step may not be absolutely necessary, but I just want to make sure that the rubber doesn't grab anywhere and just releases easier for us. The other reason we're doing this is because all this texture is running horizontally, and we're going to be pouring the rubber vertically. So as the rubber starts to rise against all that texture, we want it to be as slick as possible so that it goes into all that texture and doesn't merely graze over it and create bubbles in the rubber. Now we're going to start mixing the rubber. We're going to need probably about 2 80-pound kits. It's a little bit too much rubber to mix in one batch. So we're going to mix in multiple batches. A 5-gallon pail holds about 40 pounds of liquid, but we can't fill it to the top because we have no room to actually stir it. So we'll probably do about 25 to 30-pound mixes, one at a time, and just keep pouring them into the mold until we're finished. Okay, so I picked it up on top of the other pail because it's not quite as far to bend over. When you mix, you want to try and mix stirring in a figure 8 and also scraping the sides and bottom of the pail as you mix.
Guys, I'm going to start ordering a lot of rubber. How long do you mix it for?
I usually count on my head to 100, just so that I'm mixing consistent batch to batch.
So now you're at 65, right?
I'm at 80. Okay, so now we're ready to pour. We've tilted the mold up. The reason we're doing that is this wood has a lot of texture in it. So we want to try and get the rubber to rise up and then flow kind of with the texture as it fills it out so that we don't create too many bubbles over it. Once we get it very full, we'll pull the wood out and drop it down to level and finish it off. So you can see how I'm trying to pour into the lowest corner of the box, and I'm also pouring slowly so that the rubber doesn't splash all over the place and essentially trap air bubbles against the model. I'm trying to have it drip all the way down to the bottom and fill from the bottom up so that it chases any air that's against the model up before the rubber so that it doesn't get trapped under the rubber. That was good timing. So we did spring a small leak here, and it may be because we tried to put the clay gasket in and some of it fell out, some of it stayed in, so that it might be holding it open a little bit. But we'll just take some warm clay and tuck that in there to stop it. It may just be coming between some of the boards too. It may not be the seal to the box, but actually the attachment of boards. So you'll notice we're doing this in several pours, and if you're by yourself and this takes you all day, that's okay. Normally we just want to make sure that we have everything poured within an 8-hour period. When you get to the end of the bucket, don't go into the bucket and scrape out whatever material is left in the bucket. This is the material that's most likely not mixed because it's clinging to the sides and bottom. Just pour out whatever comes out naturally and stop. Whatever is left in the bucket will cure overnight, and you can peel it out the next day and reuse the buckets. So we've got it pretty full at this end, and now we're going to drop this end down so it flows across so we can fill up the top of it yet. Well, I'm still pouring into the same corner because I want it to flow across what's left and trap as little air as possible. As long as you're pouring rubber into rubber, you're okay, so I always try to stay just behind the leading flow. We may end up using up exactly that 80-pound kit because we have just a little bit left over there yet, right? So. Okay, so we're finishing off the pour now. We're going to let this sit overnight. Preferably you want to let it sit for about 24 hours before you strip it. And then you should let the mold actually sit for 7 days before you poured the first piece of concrete. Of course, none of our customers do that because everybody's always in a hurry. So they'll start pouring within 24 to 48 hours. And the risk is that the rubber's not quite developed all its strength properties until the full 7 days are up. So now that we've finished pouring, if you can see it in there or not, there's little bubbles that have risen to the surface. They're bubbles from mixing the rubber and also maybe some air bubbles that are coming off of the model itself. So we'll just spray a little bit of 2300 on top of the surface. It takes away the surface tension and allows those bubbles to pop. This step isn't absolutely necessary because it's really cosmetic. Okay, it's the next morning. We've let it sit overnight. It's all firmed up real good, and we're going to start taking apart the mold box now.
because of the way our lip comes up and over, in order to remove this side, I've got to pry this entire side off that lip. Then the side will pull right back. Pry it off and then shim it up. Now I've got the side out of the groove up top, which will later hold our form board. I got to come up and out to get it out of the groove down below. There's been some rubber leakage, which acts as a great glue. Now I just need to go up with it. As you can see, it's coming up, the inner mold is moving. There we go. Pop it out. Now eventually our form board will sit in here and in here, and that will hold the form tight against our side. As you can see, I've flipped the box over. The reason for that is the top side, which is the bottom now, has that groove in which will give us the return on the lip. The bottom side doesn't, so once I strip this, I'll have access to the inner part of the mold so we can start to work it loose from our form. And if we need to, we'll show you where we're going to have a part line, a cut line. Now in order to line it back up, I'm just going to drill a couple of holes so that when we look down in, we'll be able to line this form back up with the box mold so that all these screw lines will work. I'll drill one centered, one slightly off centered, and that way there's no way that once you look or put a pin in there, all these other holes will line up.
Okay, so now we've got all the mold box torn apart. We turned it upside down. We're going to start working it loose from this side, get all of this loose, and then take it from there. So now we've got this whole thing loosened up all the way around. Now we're going to pick one of the corners and we're going to make a cut along the edge of that vinyl that's going to be our metal when we're finished. So if I pry this back, you can see down in here. Okay, so now as I pry this back, I'm looking for the edge of the vinyl. That's going to be where I make my cut. When you cut, you don't want to cut in a straight line. You really want to cut a little shark tooth-like. It gives us something to locate to. And this is 7445, so this is a pretty hard rubber, a little bit tough to cut. You want to hold this open? And cutting is really, it's a two-man job because somebody has to continue to pull it apart as you cut down. Okay, now you can back off a little on the pulley, not quite so hard. Okay. Okay, if you can continue to kind of hold this open for me, I'll continue to cut down. That's actually this side we're going to pull away, not so much that side yet. That's good.
Oh, yeah, you can see it clear as day, huh?
Yep.
Further?
Like that, that's good.
Not too much?
Yep, you're doing good. Made the cut all the way up from the top. Now we flip the whole thing over and we're going to cut from this end so that the cuts meet up.
Right on here.
This is the fire part. It is crashing in there. This part locks. What's that?
That's the rest of the match,
Okay, so it came off, and you can see a lot of the burnt wood actually came off with it, and that's because that wood was so fragile that the rubber kind of bled into it a little bit more than anywhere else. The plan is now we'll take this and we'll pressure wash it to get out as much as we can before we do the first casting. Anything that's left behind will probably be pulled out with the first casting. Okay, so it's amazing. These things pretty much stand up on their own. If we didn't have a seam here, it would probably stand here by itself. But in order to hold it nice and square and true and reinforced, we'll end up putting the board around it like this one. So once the board is around it, it's pretty much a stable unit. But it is surprising how much it stands up just by itself. Okay, so we've taken all of the boards and cut them to size, and then we just kind of cleaned up the edges so they fit back in a little better. If you remember, we put a fillet inside all those boards there, so we're allowing clearance for that. So we're going to start locating them back in now, and we'll start with the seam line. First side's on.
Strap the whole thing.
Okay, so the whole mold box is put back together. We've got the strap going around that holds everything together. Other than that, the boards just kind of key into all four sides, the same way the mold box originally did. Our parting line is over in this corner here. You can see if we pull that apart a little bit, that's where she's going to part. but with the strap holding everything together, it seals up nice and tight so you won't see it. Okay, here's a close-up of how that parting line works. You can see how we can pull it apart. When you put the strap on and pull everything back together snug, parting line completely disappears, and we're ready to cast concrete. Okay, and so 5 days later, we have 2 molds. This is the original model that we started with. We could probably use it again. But that's all, folks.